As a child, I really loved twilight, especially summer. The boundary time between day and night. First the sunset, crimson golden clouds, as if painted by a talented artist. The sun has not yet completely disappeared, but in the east the sky is rapidly darkening, the first stars appear, and the moon is above them in a semicircle. The birds are in a hurry to spend the sun, sing an evening song and climb into the nests. Hide from the night robber owl. And then the sky in the west also turns dark blue, and the sorceress night in a cloak embroidered with golden stars comes into her own. This time of day is always shrouded in some kind of mystery for me. Either I was a big dreamer and loved to invent fairy tales, or I was too lazy to get up early and admire an equally beautiful sunrise, but twilight captivated me much more. I also loved my grandmother Katya very much, and was looking forward to the summer holidays to go to a distant Pomeranian village with a funny name Koskino, where grandma lived all her life. Nowhere did I feel so cozy and calm as in my grandmother's old house. I liked everything about it. The creaking floorboards, the big Russian oven in which my grandmother baked amazing stitches, lace capes on pillows, colorful patchwork blankets, and the very atmosphere of kindness and love that my grandmother generously gave me. Unfortunately, these magical summer months flew by very quickly. My mother came to pick me up, and we returned back to the big city, loaded with jars of pickles, jams, bundles of dried mushrooms, knitted socks, mittens and other gifts made by kind grandmother's hands. I didn't want to go back at all. I'd rather stay with my grandmother forever, but my parents won't let me. Or rather, my stepfather doesn't care, and my mother, of course, loves me very much and will miss me. Stepfather Aristok Ivanovich appeared in our life a year ago. Everything about him was weighty, portly, important. Name, figure, character, position. He worked as the head of a defense plant and devoted most of his time to his company. He was a very serious, pedantic and unsmiling man. Why did Mom marry him? Aristarchus Ivanovich was the complete opposite of my father. Although, I remember Dad very vaguely. He died on an expedition when I was still a baby, but the image of a cheerful, kind man with a light, boyishly perky forelock and a small moustache rose in my memory. Coming home, my father would open his arms, and I would run up joyfully, knowing that he would pick me up, throw me up, and then kiss me hard. Aristarchus Ivanovich hardly noticed me. He greeted me politely in the morning, wished me good night before going to bed, and congratulated me with a phrase on holidays. After my mother's marriage, my life has not changed for the better. We moved from our small but such a cozy apartment to a spacious 4-room mansion, which the plant allocated to Aristarchus Ivanovich. I had to change schools and break up with old friends. Mom was not allowed to redo something in the apartment to her liking and invite her friends. From now on, all holidays and birthdays were celebrated exclusively in a narrow family circle. My schoolmates were also banned from entering. My stepfather preferred to rest in a marine sanatorium from the enterprise. As soon as my mother timidly hinted about a joint trip to the sea, my stepfather immediately raised the question with an edge. They say he has a hard and responsible job, he plows like an ox for a whole year, and has the right to rest at his discretion, that is, without unnecessary worries. A child can catch a cold, get burned in the sun, get poisoned, and so on, and he's not going to babysit me on vacation either. In principle, Aristarchus Ivanovich did not coddle me from the word in general, but my mother did not argue. Noticing my mother's faded look, my stepfather offered to take me a ticket to a pioneer camp from the same factory, even for the whole summer, but my mother decided differently. She took me to my grandmother's, which I was incredibly happy about. I have never had to be bored at Baba Katya's. She always found time to tell a fairy tale, sew clothes for dolls, take them to the river or to the forest for mushrooms. And I also found friends and had a great vacation. The only thing Grandma didn't allow was to go out the door after sunset. But so did all the villagers, without exception. At dusk, you won't meet anyone on the street. I have never admired the village sunsets and the starry summer sky. No one walked in an embrace until the morning, couples in love did not listen to the nightingales, even the dogs fell silent. The village seemed to be dying out until morning. Once I asked my grandmother why such rules. At first she denied that the villagers were used to going to bed early and getting up with the roosters, but I could see in her eyes that Grandma was hiding something. And when I got a little older, I finally found out the secret. 100 years ago, said Baba Katya, 2 brothers-in-law, Prokor and Timothy, lived in this village. Since childhood, the Roberts were friendly, and as they grew up, they decided to become spiritually related according to an old custom. They exchanged crosses and became cross brothers, which was considered no worse than relatives by blood. They created families, children were born. And later their daughters became just as strong friends. Timothy had Nastenka, and Proctor had Anfisa's daughter. The girls were different, like day and dark night. Nastenka is blonde blue-eyed, modest and quiet, like a birch tree. Anfisa is black-eyed, cheerful, bright, like a red viburnum. They grew up side by side, ate one piece of bread, were inseparable, like twins. And as soon as they got bored, their fathers sent them to a neighboring village for a guest house, or rather, to look. And it was necessary for girls to fall in love with the same guy. Both of them liked Stepan. The girls did not hide their feelings from each other and agreed not to envy the one who is sweet. Nastya suggested it, and Anfisa gladly agreed, not doubting that Stepan would choose her. And a beauty and the first singer and a dancer. Nastya is far away from her. However, in the old days the Pomas carefully chose the bride. We looked closely for a long time, consulted with each other, because a house without a mistress is an orphan. And Stepan chose the modest Nastenka as his wife, and not the bright Anfisa. Then there was a split in friendship. Anfisa did not give a sign, but she harbored fierce anger and envy. Nastya was preparing for the wedding, full of joyful hopes, when she cried under the floor of the house, predicting the death of someone from the family. Nastya's mother froze in horror. Her father was also scared at first, but then waved his hand to calm the household. They say, "Don't be afraid, nothing will happen." In the morning, as usual, Anfisa came in, called Nastya to the forest for berries. The girls walked up from the hut, filled baskets, and the day turned out to be hot, and Anfisa offered to swim in the river. The girls went into the water, started splashing and laughing, and then suddenly Anfisa grabbed Nastya by the braid and dragged her to the depths. Let go. I can't swim. Where are you taking me? Nastya shouted. But her friend, not listening, dragged her to the middle of the river. And she threw it at the depth. Nastya struggled to get out, floundered, cried, asked for help, but Anfisa swam back to shore, abandoning her named Sitka. When the girl came ashore, Nastya was no longer seen or heard. Anfisa, meanwhile, ran to the village to call for help. She screamed, cried, allegedly grieving for her friend. People came running to the river. They searched for Nastya for a long time, but they never found her. Apparently the body was carried away by Bistrina. Instead of a wedding, a funeral happened. But the empty grave was buried. Anfisa mourned the named sister the most, and a year later she was going to marry Stepan. And he married a murderer. I exclaimed. Apparently, he didn't know, didn't guess, Grandma replied, and didn't have time to get married. A few days before the wedding, Anfisa and her friends went to the river at sunset. Water at this time is like fresh milk. Good water. Anfisa shouted, "Come here." While the girls undressed, while this and that, the sun set completely. The Busel rose above the river. And the girls began to blaspheme that a figure appeared out of that wet fog. We took a closer look and froze. Nastya came out of the fog. But what? Scary, bluish, the look is like glass. And she went straight to Anfisa. Before the girls had time to say a word, the drowned woman grabbed Anfisa and dragged her along. She screamed, cried, called for help, but the deceased in the blink of an eye pulled her into the depths, and both disappeared under the water. Then the girls came to their senses and rushed to run as fast as they could. The people gathered by the river again. Anfisa's body was found. People did not believe their friends. They decided that they had imagined a dead woman. However, Stepan disappeared without a trace after Anfisa. No one knew where he had gone. And they searched on the river and in the forest. Then they decided that they had moved to Archangelsk out of grief. No joke, both brides died on the eve of the wedding. But that was just the beginning of the trouble. Nastya turned into a water witch. It's like a mermaid, but without a tail. It was necessary, according to local custom, to put a piece of brick in the mouth of the deceased, and to nail her hands and feet with stakes, but they did not find the body. And the witch began to come to the village at dusk, knock on houses, and lure people out. As he lures out, he will fool his head and lead him to the river, but drowns him. I killed several people like that, and then people found out and stopped going out in the evenings. And why did Nastya kill innocent people? I asked the question. So she became a witch and didn't want to believe people anymore. Her most loved ones betrayed her, so she got angry at everyone. Grandma. But that was a long time ago. 100 years have passed. And are you still afraid of her? Sometimes it comes in our time. I've drowned 3 people in my memory, Grandma replied seriously. That's why we take care, we close the windows and doors after sunset. Go to bed. It's too late, she kissed me, tucked in the blanket and turned out the light. Of course, I couldn't fall asleep for a long time. I lay and thought about the unfortunate fate of the girl, about her terrible death and about revenge. And when I returned home from my grandmother, I couldn't resist telling my mother this story. It was at lunch, my mother nodded that she had known this legend since childhood, and my stepfather grimaced, got up from the table and left. He returned with an encyclopedia in his hands and was not too lazy to read me a whole lecture about underwater currents, pools and other things that are quite real, dangerous, and have nothing to do with fictional mermaids or mermaids. Shame on you, Maria. He always called me by my full name, to believe in mysticism, being a Soviet pioneer. I don't want to hear such nonsense again. And turning to his mother, he added, how can a Katerina Vasilievna fill a child's head with such nonsense? I didn't hear what my mother answered, because I literally flew into the room, scolding myself for a long tongue. And she made a promise to herself never to confide in her stepfather. And I believed my grandmother, not him. Several years have passed since then. I grew up, graduated from high school and entered a pedagogical institute. She visited her grandmother every summer, refusing trips to the sea or to other resorts. It was still more interesting and nicer for me at my grandmother's than at any resort. But to my great sorrow, she died a year after my admission. My mother followed her, literally a few years later, and I was left all alone in the whole wide world. Some time after my mother's death, my stepfather handed me the keys to a one-room small apartment, explaining that he had fulfilled his duty to his stepdaughter. He would probably be very surprised and even consider me ungrateful if he heard that I wanted to have a father all my life. A real father. But Aristarchus Ivanovich could not become such a father, or did not want to. And he bought me off. I haven't seen him since. Occasionally I called, congratulating him on the holidays. He politely thanked me, and our communication, by mutual consent, was limited to this. It didn't go well in my personal life either. The only one didn't come across. 2 or 3 acquaintances turned out to be unsuccessful, and the guy I liked was not eager to ask me out. Friends got married, had children. We saw each other less and less. I worked at the school, devoting almost all my free time to the students. The first vacation in my life has come. 2 whole months. And suddenly there was such a burning desire to go to Koskino that I already groaned with impatience. Of course, no one is waiting for me there, but my grandmother's house is intact. I will return to my childhood for a while. And I bought a ticket to Arkhangelsk. Here is my native village, though noticeably deserted. After the collapse of the collective farm, there was practically no work. Younger people left for the cities, only old men and old women remained, who gradually moved to the old cemetery. I looked with bitterness at the boarded-up huts, leaning fences, deserted and overgrown with weeds farmsteads. A house without a mistress is an orphan, I remembered an old Pomeranian saying. It seems that almost the whole village has become an orphan. From 300 houses, there are a little more than a dozen residential ones left. With such gloomy thoughts, I approached my grandmother's house. My heart sank at the thought that no one would come out to meet me, would not hug me, would not be happily fussing around the stove. Throwing my bag with my things, I hurried to the cemetery and sat for a long time near my grandmother's grave, crying and talking to her. Returning to the house, I lay down wearily on the bed, thinking that I needed to put things out and put things in order in the house. Wipe the dust and wash the floors, but my eyes closed by themselves, and I literally fell asleep. I dreamed about my grandmother. She was sitting next to me on the edge of the bed and calling me. Masha. Get up. We need to close the shutters and the door. Sunset is coming soon. She will come at dusk. The witch will come. I woke up to a knock on the door. The sun has completely set, the first stars have lit up in the sky. Yes, yes. I'm coming. I shouted, fully confident that one of the neighbors had come, having learned about my arrival. The residents of Koskino were very kind and friendly people, and I knew many of them well. Hello, I began, opening the door, and stopped. A girl in antique clothes was standing on the threshold. Water trickled down from his hair, a bluish terrible face, a glassy look. The witch. Flashed through my head. I didn't close the windows, and she saw me. She came for me. I wanted to step back and slam the door, but I couldn't take a step. It was like I was paralyzed. Come with me, Nastya ordered, and I, like a zombie, obediently stepped off the porch. The deceased took me by the hand and led me along. Nastya's hand was cold and slippery, like a fish. I shuddered with fear and disgust, but there was nothing I could do. As if under hypnosis, I walked to the river, knowing that I was going to die. There was not a single thought left in my head, fear froze my soul. Here's the river. I'm finished. The mind tried to resist. Don't go in there. Pull out your hand. Run as fast as you can from here. But the witch, as if reading my thoughts, tightened her grip on my hand and dragged me into the water. Here I am already at the depth, my legs do not feel the bottom, and the water woman pulls me down, not letting go of me. My vision blurred. The last thing I remember was my plaintive cry, and then darkness came. I woke up in my grandmother's house, on the bed. There were two guys standing next to me and looking at me with concern. Thank God. I came to my senses. One exclaimed. He seemed familiar to me. Mash. Why are you drowning yourself? He added reproachfully. Volodya. I smiled weakly. Did you save me? Did you recognize a childhood friend? He laughed. No, it was not I who saved, but Pasha. My friend. The second guy nodded at me. How did you get there? I didn't notice anyone. No wonder. You were walking towards the river like a sleepwalker with your hands outstretched, he replied. So what happened? Nastya dragged me, I answered quietly. She came for me at dusk because I didn't close the shutters and the door. We didn't see anyone near you. Volodya answered in surprise. Really, Pasha? There was no one, the guy confirmed. Wait, which Nastya are you talking about? About a witch or something? Volodya guessed. Well, yes. About her. I told him everything that had happened, but Volodya objected. Mash. Well, you're not small enough to believe grandmother's fairy tales anymore. As a child, I listened to enough and was scared to hell of a witch, and then I realized that grannies just went to bed early because they got up with roosters. And the water was not scared in vain. So that they don't get into the rapid and drown. I didn't argue with him. I wanted to think myself that I just had a terrible dream. But, unfortunately, it was a reality. I saw the witch as well as the two guys standing by the bed. And only a happy accident saved me from death. As Volodya later said, he came to visit his grandmother and brought a friend to stay. Pasha hails from the Don village. I have never seen the real Russian North. Steppe eagle, dashing Cossack, Volodya sang jokingly, winking at me. In the evening, the guys gathered for fishing. Approaching the river, they saw me, heard a scream, and rushed to help. Pasha jumped into the water first and managed to pull me out. Our friends joke that they say he went fishing, but caught his wife. Finally, happiness smiled on me too. The black streak, I hope, is over. There is only one habit left from the past, stupid, in my husband's opinion, to close the door after sunset, since it can come at dusk.